Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, retired Lieutenant Colonel Matthew J. Lewis. And he's here to share with us his new book, Hiring Veterans: How to Leverage Military Talent for Organizational Growth. So are you an employer, HR manager, or small business owner, and you'd like to hire veterans who are planning to transition into the civilian work life? Well, today's show's just for you. So Matthew Lewis is one of the nation's leading experts in career transitions for members of the military community. He advises veterans on their transitional efforts and employers on hiring programs designed to successfully assimilate these valuable talent pools. He's the author of the award-winning HarperCollins book, Mission Transition, a practical guide for veterans in career transition, and the Career Press book, Hiring Veterans, a practical guide for organizations on how to build programs to successfully assimilate this valuable talent pool. So welcome to the show, retired Lieutenant Colonel Matthew J. Lewis.
Well, Marianne, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me on. The honor's really mine, and please call me Matt.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to share your new book with us today. What was the inspiration for writing this book?
So how this came to be, it's a bit of a story. Like all things that are people are passionate about, this one's personal to me. When I left active duty military a long time ago, I won't give you the date, it'll betray the old person that I am. There was little to speak of back in the day of support for people leaving the military. There was a little program called Army Career Alumni Program. I'm a veteran of the Army service, and literally administered within the last 5 days of being on active duty by people that had literally walked out probably a week before I did. So it was an exercise in the blind leading the blind. So necessity being the mother of invention, I kind of had to create my own way of transitioning out of the military. So I cobbled together my own process. It worked out well for me. Army being people, or really military people being what they are, they tend to have a desire to help out their peer set. So I began reaching back out to my peers and helping them across the way. This built on itself many times over the years and resulted in a couple pieces of feedback that I'd consistently get, because people would tend to land well. One was thank you, a message of gratitude, because they probably landed better than they would have otherwise. The second is, you should really scale what you're doing here to help others find a landing place in the real world. So forward several decades later, and so now I've been in the professional world for many, many years, and have begun to approach this difficulty, this challenge that people have in finding full employment, optimal career fields when they leave the military. I wanted to tackle this holistically, and I call that the civil military divide. And there's all sorts of statistics out there to codify and quantify, qualify precisely what that means. But I'm approaching eliminating that civil military divide through three different efforts. My first book, Mission Transition, a practical guide to help service members find full employment, optimal career fields, now the most awarded book of its kind, is focused on the military side. The book that's coming out, called Hiring Veterans, is aimed at the other half of the civil military divide. And Hiring Veterans is a practical guide for organizational leaders, for-profit, nonprofit, academic, governmental, whatever type of organization is, a practical guide to help them build programs to bring on these incredibly valuable talent pools that reside coming out of our military, not only the service members themselves, but their spouses as well. So, and then the third leg of the stool, even if you're successful with those two, just to round this out, I maintain a day job now as president of a little startup called PeerPost, where we match supply and demand of talent in the country with a specific focus on members of the military community.
Well, it sounds like you stay very busy with the work that you do, and thank goodness that you are pursuing this and doing this work. What do you think is some of the big hurdles that businesses run into, or maybe some of the misconceptions?
Well, it's a great point because the first chapter, in fact, is focused on understanding military culture and the nature of that divide. There is an absolute ton of misinformation out there. And so let me just tackle what are some of the myths out there. One of the myths is that members of the military community are less educated than those coming out of, say, undergraduate institutions. And fact of the matter is, it's anything but. A couple of different measuring sticks. If you just look at percentage with high school degrees, veterans have 6% greater ability to do that. If you look at people with that have graduate or other advanced degrees, veterans are 160% more likely than their civilian peers to have that. And by the way, veterans with bachelor's degrees have 3 times more experience than non-veterans. There's another myth out there that military service members coming out, everyone is a combat specialist, and as I call them, trigger pullers. And I'll get into PTSD later. But the fact of the matter is, less than 15% of service members serve in any sort of a combat capacity. Now, I was one of those people, but flip that around, 85% or more served in a function, a capacity, think, logistics, medical, service support, transportation, maintenance. I could go on and on. But 85% serve in a capacity that's immediately accredited into the real world. There's another myth out there about, veterans being broken, everyone having PTSD. Again, while the percentage of veterans, especially in the post 9/11 generation, tends to be higher in a given population, but if you take a notional 1,000-person organization and apply the percentages of those that have PTSD and the percentage of those that are veterans, you have more than 5 times the people, civilians in your organization, that have PTSD than veterans do. It's another myth out there about veterans not being diverse. Fact of the matter is, you hire veterans, you implicitly get diversity, because 31% of active duty military are made up of racial and ethnic minorities. There's a couple other myths, and then I'll be quiet here. One of the chief complaints I have about from employers is veterans are unable to be found, yet there's 200,000 matriculating from the service annually, and they're available year-round, unlike folks coming off of academic campuses. There's another myth out there that there are no quantifiable outcomes when I hire veterans. Let me just throw out a couple statistics. Today's military community is comprised of 37 million folks who wield 1.2 trillion in annual buying power. And oh, by the way, if you bring on veterans as part of a talent management approach that's looking to bring in the most inclusive workforce that includes veterans, 22% of these organizations result in a 22% increase in productivity, 13 times higher mean cash flow, 4 times more able to deal with personnel problems. And then last, but certainly not least, there's a myth out there that hiring veterans has nothing to do with national security. The fact of the matter is, hiring veterans has direct and quantifiable impact on national security. If today's service members aren't seen as having successful employment outcomes, why would I, as a 16 or 17-year-old, raise my right hand and enlist in the military? That is, in fact, the exact problem that we're seeing today, whereby the services are unable to meet their recruiting goals. And then the last statistic I'll throw out is, if veterans aren't getting employed, guess who pays the uninsurance bill? This is the Department of Defense. And those funds come directly out of Department of Defense's operating budget, taking directly away from funds that would otherwise be spent helping train the troops and spent on our common defense.
Well, I wanted to thank you for your service, by the way. I'm so sorry I did not start with that. I think it's so important that we support all of our men and women in our armed services. Are there certain types of governing regulations that we need to be aware of, employers need to be aware of when they hire veterans?
So, one, just react to your comment. I appreciate it, but I'm still focused on helping individuals and my way of thinking. And as I say in my first book, I still continue to serve, just in other capacities. And it's really kind of the trick, if you will, helping our service members to successfully transition and utilize their talents, their competencies, their skills in ways that add value just in a different environment. But to your question, yes, veterans are a protected class, and there are any number of regulations with which individual organizations, their HR leaders specifically, need to be compliant, whether it's USERA, VEVRA, the ADA, FEMLA, et cetera. And those regulations and the need to be compliant increases if you're documented as being a federal contractor, in which case there are specific regulations governed by the Office of the Federal Contract Compliance Program that establishing an affirmative action protocol and certain workforce percentages that need to be met. So yes, there are, and the Chapter 2 in hiring veterans specifically spells all of them out and what they need to do in order to comply.
What are some things that businesses need to know also when it comes to hiring, let's say, wounded warriors?
So a couple things about wounded warriors. For one, not all wounds are visible, for sure. But again, back to another myth is that the myth being that most veterans require disability accommodations and they're very expensive. Again, the fact of the matter is most don't require disability accommodations, and 58% of them cost nothing. And so one of the difficulties that employers are going to find is having veterans self-identify. And in fact, their peer set, veteran business resource groups, just trying to get their peer members of their tribe, as we say, to join them is sometimes difficult because veterans don't think of themselves as veterans and thus don't join. I won't belabor that point, but it part and parcel to self-identifying as a veteran is identifying potentially as a disabled veteran to the extent that it applies. And so once that is established, however, again, back to your previous question on regulations that need to be followed and that organizational TA and HR leaders need to comply with, they need to obviously understand what those are and mind their P's and Q's in doing so.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
The first thing you need to know about me is that I love my kids, but they are not my everything. They used to be, but that's when my entire life fell apart. In order to pick back up the pieces, I had to put the love I have for myself before everything else, including my kids. I'm Jessica Dennehy, and I own multiple businesses. I'm a best-selling author, and I have all the strategies that I've used to make my life what it is today. And I'm going to teach you how to do them in my new book, Selfish is a Superpower. So go get your copy today on Barnes & Noble or jessicadennehy.com.
Announcing a revolutionary tool for wellness. Scalar Light has the ability to enhance and harmonize your own bioenergies. With Scalar Light, you can get started in just minutes and begin feeling better the very next day. Scalar Light is a remote energy that gently and subtly works with your own body's bioenergies, increases pro-cellular wellness, and enhances your body's immunity.
Experience the benefits of Scalar Light. Try a complimentary 15-day experience at scalarlight.com.
In your hands lie ancestral patterns. These patterns shape how you think, what you struggle with, and experiences you love, your life pattern. We're going into the latest neuroscience of biological hand analysis, a realm beyond palmistry where science and the soul entwine. Hand analysis is the latest method to transform lifelong patterns. I am Master Hand Analyst Brent Bruning. Join us and visit thepowerinyourhands.com.
Looking for a page-turner? Cozy up to a fantasy adventure romance trilogy with The Girl in the Toile Wallpaper by Mary Kay Savarese. The second novel in the Star Writers trilogy, The Star Writers Club, is coming soon. Take the journey. Connect with Mary at www.maryksavarise.com. Her books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores.
With Breath Hub, you'll experience the transformative power of breath as it harmonizes your body, mind, and spirit. Recommended by experts in fitness, sports, psychology, and medicine. Meet the scientific way of being well. Breath Hub. Breathe better, live better.
Pandemonium. Fast forward 20 years. A U.S. president seizes control of all U.S. missiles, the power grid, the banking system, and every computer in America as he hides in an underground bunker. Pandemonium, a captivating sci-fi thriller where a hidden war, psychics, aliens, artificial intelligence, and transcendental love collide with the latest media technology. Pandemonium, live to all devices. Get your copy on paperback or digital. Free sample at getpsychic.org.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, retired Lieutenant Colonel Matthew J. Lewis, who's sharing his new book with us, Hiring Veterans: How to Leverage Military Talent for Organizational Growth. So how do HR managers and small businesses and corporations identify the veteran talent that they're looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. It tends to be one of the leading ones that I get from organizations, so much so that I devoted an entire chapter to it in the new book, probably the longest chapter in the book, chapter 6, that is. And the purpose being, I wanted to put to rest that question once and for all, because there are no lack of outlets by which organizations can find veteran talent. I won't rattle them off because literally there's probably hundreds. But to sum up a few high-level things that I would point out, one, I would encourage them to join the Veteran Jobs Mission. Full transparency, I sit on JP Morgan's External Advisory Council for Veterans and Military Affairs. JP Morgan was the originator of what was originally called the 100,000 Jobs Mission, and they immediately blew way past that goal. And they've done incredible things over the decade plus that it's been up and running. Today, the Veteran Jobs Mission consists of about 320 or more organizations that have established goals to bring on veterans and military spouses and regularly get together to trade best practices. So I'd encourage them to join that community. I would also encourage them to utilize veteran collaboratives, which there are about rough order of magnitude 70 or 80 fully functioning, what I would call veteran collaboratives in major metropolitan areas around the country. They serve as a one-stop shop for any and all transition needs that our service members, military spouses have in those local communities, employment being one of those. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't add in my own business and have those organizations check out PurePost, whereby we will deconstruct, translate their open job recs to their underlying competencies and skills, and match those with individuals in our database that have those precise competencies and skills and would be an optimal fit for those roles.
Well, thank goodness we have that type of resource that your company provides. That way, it's easy for companies then to go ahead and contact you and hire veterans.
Exactly right. And it's part of our vision is to level the playing field in today's talent market through this matching. And we do so by, for the first time, really automating a resume, which tends to be one of the bigger hurdles, especially for members of the military community that are probably creating a resume for the first time in their adult lives. And so we automate that. And in doing so, we translate everything that they've done, which is, again, is a big challenge that they tend to face, identifying their underlying competencies and skills and match them to employment opportunities that do just that.
Do you do any type of pre-training for type of meetings or anything like that, so the veterans know what they are to expect when they arrive at these jobs?
Yeah, I'll point to a couple things, both on our PurePost website. We have a knowledge center that has about 30 video courses set up that walk them through very basic building blocks, both in terms of establishing themselves for pivoting to life fully employed in the real world, and then how to function once they're in. The other place I would point to is my website. Again, I have a separate entity that oversees all my publishing work, Lewis Advisors website, MatthewJLewis.com. On there, you will find a plethora, a litany of resources to support both the books, to include courses, both a series of video courses and an e-course to support them throughout the entirety of their transition and well into their time once they get on board their new employment opportunity.
So how do companies help our veterans understand what their company culture is?
Culture is one of the primary challenges. And in fact, this is one of the first exercises that I tackle within hiring veterans in the very first chapter. And key to that is, one, understanding what your culture is, which, a lot of companies, most companies, in fact, will state a series of values, which are the basis for behavior that enable a culture. They will have that on their website, but the way behavior actually takes place on a day-to-day basis within an organization may be slightly different, or depending on the organization, something entirely different. And so the exercise I have employers go through is I break down culture, broadly speaking, into more than a couple dozen different dimensions. And I state what is a stereotypical military culture along each of those dimensions. And then I tend to stereotype both a large public, more bureaucratic, I'll use that adjective, organization in the real world versus a smaller, more entrepreneurial organization in the civilian world. And then there's a fourth column in that table, which is to help the organization to identify where and how their specific organization fits along each of those dimensions. The interesting thing in doing that exercise, again, I'm stereotyping with different size companies in the real world. The military culture on a good many of those dimensions tends to mimic the smaller, more entrepreneurial organization in some degrees. That's not to say that those types of organizations are an ideal fit for everyone coming out of the military, no way, shape, or form. But it is an indicator and underlies some of the statistics we see out there, whereby veterans, or at least greater numbers of veterans vis-a-vis civilian peers, are operating in a smaller, more entrepreneurial environment in the real world.
Well, our veterans provide such a benefit to any company. What are some ways that companies can retain veterans and make sure they keep that talent?
You're hitting on a very key point there. And again, hiring veterans is focused not just on hiring them, but it serves little use if you can't retain them. And studies show that you want to aim to try to retain this incredibly valuable talent pool at least a couple of years. Studies tend to show that if you can retain them beyond 2 years, their retention rates tends to be higher, again, than their civilian peers. And again, I'll back that up by making sure that some groundwork is in place to enable their successful assimilation such that they can thrive in the organization. I'll point to one, having a veteran business resource group that enables their tribe, I purposely use that term, their tribe of peers, fellow veteran service members within the organization, to coalesce and help them successfully network one with them, and then two beyond them to, I'll call it the educated peer set within the organization that understand who veterans are, what they bring to the table, the cultural differences and similarities. And then if I think of concentric circles in the network, then finally to the outer circle of the network, those that don't have that familiarity and experience, and which tends to be the majority of people within organizations today, again, given that civil military divide. So having a BRG. Two, having mentoring programs in place such that these service members are able to connect with those more senior in the organization, and those senior members are able to impart some of the guidance and behavioral expectations and structure that the incoming service member needs to understand, again, in order to adapt, adjust, and thrive within the organization. Beyond that, we want to make sure that these individuals are properly in place in opportunities that are going to effectively utilize their underlying competencies and skills from the outset. So deployment is critical, and making sure that there's a match there. And I also point to feedback, which should be in short order to mimic what they experienced in the military, but also relatively frequent, at least within the first year or two, called every 30, 60, 90 days or thereabouts, just so that they're, again, receiving the type of feedback, frequency of feedback that they're used to receiving in the military, makes it easier for them to adjust, adapt, assimilate within the organization. That by and large, and there's another series of touch points that I point out in the book, and a sequence of steps and a table laid out. But that series of steps tends to get them effectively assimilated in the organization, such that they're able to be more easily retained than they would be otherwise.
So having common training aspects where they're constantly doing some training, is that beneficial for veterans because they're so used to having a goal to work towards?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Establishing part of that whole onboarding sequence and training is certainly establishing goals, both short-term and near-term. And I would say goals both in their personal and professional lives. And that training, while ideally it's done in person, that's the nature in which it was typically done in the military. But if it can't be done in person, it should be at least provided to them as soon as possible and electronically, such that they can digest that and begin to apply it. Again, in concert with their peer set, their tribe, their supervisor and mentor, who can help guide them in understanding, applying, and helping them adjust as need be as they land within the organization.
Are there different things that businesses need to be aware of when we manage members of the Guard or Reserve?
For sure. And employers should understand or have as context that the military itself has structured, as of 2008, when President Bush II operationalized the reserve. What this meant was that for the sake of overseas contingency operations and regular activations and deployments, the Guard and Reserve were effectively put on par with active duty units. What this means for employers is that individuals that are members of the Guard and Reserve this day and age tend to be activated and deployed on a somewhat more frequent basis than those of, say, a generation ago. When I came up, it was the stereotypical 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, and that was about it. You could expect to be recalled, activated, deployed maybe once through the entirety of your time in Guard or Reserve. So that equation has changed a bit. That said, that doesn't negate all of the laws that are in place, USERA, I'll point to specifically, that require organizations to retain the roles that those employers have. I would also encourage employers to use this as a differentiating point to support these individuals that are deployed, activated. When you think about it, our nation, our capitalist nature of our economy can only thrive when it has the liberty and protection that it needs in order to do so. And these individuals are downrange, enabling that to happen. So organizations are competing on that regard, going above and beyond the requirements of USERA, and doing things such as providing incremental pay or matching what their pay would be, or protecting their job beyond what would normally be required, so on and so forth. There's much that they can do both to support the individual while they are deployed and further encourage them to come back. Last point I'll mention on this is I would encourage all organizations, if they haven't joined, to be members of ESGR, Employer Supportive Guard and Reserve, a federal entity whose mission and purpose is to help employers understand, one, what their obligations are, but two, ways in which they can help these individuals, members of the Guard and Reserve, and in turn help themselves. There's also a reward program that ESGR supports, and so organizations can enable a series of rewards that, again, helps put a shine on their own brands and provide a differentiator for them in the marketplace.
I often hear of different business owners talk about how they can't hire talent that wants to work today. And I think with hiring our veterans, that would take care of that problem, right?
Well, I'm certainly of the opinion that would be the case. In some instances, veterans can be an immediate plug-and-play asset. But I would say probably more the rule is that employers will need to meet them halfway, as it were. They bring an incredibly valuable talent set, generically speaking, and this is well documented by studies, and I've noted so in my books. HR managers in surveys say that these individuals are promoted faster, perform better, and easier to manage than their civilian peers. Lots of reasons as to why they can do that. But for them to thrive in the organization, again, it takes a formalized program and some infrastructure to enable that. And that's, again, the reason for hiring veterans. And, I'm here as an individual to help organizations that have an interest in doing so and demonstrate, encourage, support them as they attempt to bring on this incredibly valuable talent pool.
Can you share your website with us one more time? Because I think people really need to pick up hiring veterans.
Absolutely. It's MatthewJLewis.com, Lewis as in St. Louis, all together, no dots, spaces, periods, what have you, MatthewJLewis.com.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Marianne, my pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Hiring Veterans: How to Leverage Military Talent for Organizational Growth. Hiring Veterans is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. Make sure to visit Matt's website at MatthewJLewis.com. Sign up for his newsletter, be part of his community, and make sure to download his book. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.